come on up. Or should I say, come on down. Price is right. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for being here. I usually like to open programs by saying shalom. It's my favorite word. It means hello and goodbye, so you can use it even if you don't know whether you're coming or going. And it also means peace, and it's today is the Jewish Sabbath, so it's an especially important day of peace. And I, as Helen said, I grew up around the country, and so this morning we're going to get a taste of traveling. The stories I'm going to tell this morning, the first about my grandmother, the second about my father, and always it seems moving. I grew up moving. I went to 10 schools before I graduated from high school, and I had the opportunity of living in 3 states. So the first is going to be where I was born, which was in the Bronx in New York. East side, west side, all around the town. The tots sing ring around Rosie. London Bridge is falling down. And on the sidewalks of New York, my grandma and I are on the move. She's a hustler, a bustler, so we've got to get up and go. Now, Grandma and I have 4 ways that we get around the city. We take the trolley. Not the Charleston trolley where there are no tracks, but the original trolleys where the tracks ran underneath. Sometimes we take the bus, we take the train, or best of best, we walk. Now, when we take the trolley, that means we're going to the other side of the Bronx to visit Tante Freda. Tante Freda was Grandma's aunt whom she lived with when she first came to America. And we would go there frequently. We'd get on the trolley. Grandma would put in a nickel for herself. She didn't have to pay for me. I was too little. I could actually walk under the turnstile. And then I would get up and I would sit on my knees and look out the window trying to see the tracks underneath. When I sat back down, I couldn't help but notice that there were images left from the straw-woven, highly laminated seats. Grandma, I've got marks all over my knees and, oh, mamala. It's a Yiddish word. It means little mother. It's an endearment. Among my people, your destiny and your expectation to fulfill it are established very early on. Mamala, you can make up stories from the tracks on your legs. Mamala, use your imagination. We arrived at Tante Freda's house. We walked up long, dark stairways. Grandma, I don't like sometimes being at Tante Freda's. The rooms are dark. She never pulls open the curtains. Mamala, you use your imagination and you bring in your own light. We would go in and Tante Freda and Grandma would sit in the kitchen having coffee and talking, and I was allowed to go into Tante Freda's bedroom. Now, on her big bureau on the dresser, there was an oval mirror, and lined up were all her perfume bottles in every size and shape. And I was allowed to rearrange them. I'd have to stand on my tippy toes, and sometimes I'd line them up with the tallest ones and then descending order on either. It was sort of like the Rockettes at Radio City Music Hall that Grandma had taken me to see. And I would imagine that those bottles of perfume were actually Rockettes, and they would kick their legs left and right. Or sometimes I'd rearrange them, and they'd be ballet dancers and little tin soldiers. And if I would go over and draw back the curtain, well, then sometimes a little bit of sunlight would come in from the alley, and it would stream through the lace curtain, and it would glow on the other wall as if snowflakes had decorated Tante Freda's bedroom. And I would use my imagination and imagine that the Rockettes were doing a Christmas number at Radio City Music Hall. And then finally, I was allowed to join Grandma and Tante Freda in the kitchen. Grandma had told me before, we won't have lunch here. You see, Tante Freda, she doesn't have very much money, so we won't impose to have lunch, but she'll make cake and coffee and milk for us, and you'll be very polite and tell her the cake is delicious. It was a pound cake. I always believed that the reason it was called pound cake was because every bite tasted as if it were a full pound. Grandma taught me to dunk the pound cake. She had a cup of coffee, and they put my milk in a real coffee cup. Grandma took 1 teaspoon of coffee and put it into my cup of milk. It was the color of light sand. It was my coffee milk. She put her finger to her lips, said, "Shh, don't tell your mother." Grandma and I had secrets from my mother all of my life. She taught me to lift my pinky when I drank from the cup of coffee. She told me, that's what ladies in high society do. You lift your pinky, people will know you're a lady. And I put the cup back, and when we finished spending our afternoon with Tante Freda, we took the trolley back to our side of the Bronx. Now, when we took the bus, oh, that meant that we were going to Castle Hill Park. We only did that in the summer. It was in the north part of the Bronx. We lived southeast. We would take the bus up to Castle Hill Park because that's where the public swimming pool was. We were going swimming. Well, we were using our imagination to go swimming. Grandma, I don't understand. I have a bathing suit and a bathing cap and plastic shoes. Why can't I swim in the swimming pool at Castle Hill Park? Because, Mamala, in the swimming pool at Castle Hill Park lives Mr. Polio. And you cannot go into the swimming pool at Castle Hill Park. Mr. Polio will catch you. Is it any wonder that I have been afraid of water all of my life? But Grandma, how am I going to swim? You'll use your imagination. Mamala, there's a big fountain with a sprinkler in the front of Castle Hill Park. You'll put on the little plastic shoes, your bathing suit, cover your head with the cap, and you'll run around the fountain and then lift your arms and pretend to dive like Esther Williams. It's all your imagination. Then you move your arms this way, Mamala, and you'll be swimming at Castle Hill Park. To me, that was swimming. And as far as I was concerned, it was very, very satisfied. You couldn't get in trouble swimming at the fountain in Castle Hill Park. Grandma was big on not getting in trouble, which meant that when we finished and she dried me off and put me in my little shorts and halter top, we sat on a park bench and I watched the other children go up to the hot dog stand and order hot dogs for lunch. Grandma, can I get a hot dog for, oh no, Mamala, you don't know where that hot dog has been. It looked like it had been in a pot of steaming water as far as I could tell. Wasn't that enough to kill all the germs? Oh, Mamala. The men he handles it, they didn't have those gloves that people wear today. Nobody understood real sanitation except for my grandmother who had grown up in a village in Poland. No, Mamala, the man, he handles the bun and then he puts the hot dog in. In fact, you don't know where his hands have been. You don't know where the hot... Grandma brought for you a nice sandwich. Sandwiches were always nice. Food was always nice. People were always nice. Everything in our home was supposed to be nice. So I sat on the park bench and I ate my nice sandwich, and I had little celery sticks and little carrot sticks that Grandma had cut up for me. And we sat and I used my imagination to make the sandwich taste like a hot dog. After lunch, if I had been very, very good, which I always tried to be, Grandma would let me buy an ice cream bar from the bungalow barman. He came in a little ice cream cart, not Good Humor, but bungalow bar. And the top had a roof that was shaped like a bungalow, and it had a bungalow-style roof on the top. And you could line up with one dime, you could enter the heaven of ice cream. I always picked the same thing, a chocolate fudgesicle. Grandma was cleverer than I. She ordered a dreamsicle. She got twice the money for her dime, because with one dime, she got vanilla ice cream and orange sherbet. 2 for the price of 1, a very economical woman. Me, I was satisfied with just the fudgesicle. And then we would finish, Grandma would wipe me up with a towel she had brought, and home we would go on the bus from Castle Hill Park. But when we really wanted to enjoy ourselves, we took the subway all the way downtown. That meant we were going shopping. We would get up before the sun. We would climb the steps at Soundview Station. We would get on the elevated and then plunge into darkness, change from the A train on the Pelham line to the D Express at 125th Street, and we would express all the way downtown. Now, getting on that train was a challenge, because even that early in the morning, all of the seats were taken. You can't get a seat anywhere on a train in New York City, doesn't matter what time of the day. Grandma was too short to grab onto the suspended little things that were hanging from the ceiling. She was only 4 feet 10 inches tall. I came up to her waist. So Grandma would go over and she would take the pole that was in the center of the train. She always had a red plastic bag. My grandmother was recycling and reusing before anybody knew the words environmentally correct or ecology. She took that red bag and she placed it between her knees. She took her pocketbook and she held it close to her arm. She put one hand on the pole. She put me right in front of her. My hand went over hers, then hers over mine, and then mine on top. And then she taught me to sway to the rhythm of the train. My grandma taught me how to pole dance. We swayed all the way down, and after we changed at 125th Street and we took the express, we emerged at Union Square. By dawn's early light, we were in front of the biggest, brawlingest bargain basement in New York City, S. Klein. We would line up. They had police to protect the store from the shoppers and the sale. Gladiators. We were like gladiators. And then when the police finally took down the barricades and opened the doors, we charged in to S. Klein. Now, this is a shopping experience that is unparalleled in one's life. If you have not shopped like this, you have not shopped. I, to this day, am nervous and uncomfortable in stores where everything is hung up neatly, by sizes, in order, and color-coded. I don't understand a store like that, or why they need somebody there to help you. There is no need for help. No, I grew up shopping at S. Klein. Things were in bins and large cartons, like refrigerator cartons, and there were signs on them, like jackets, sweaters, pants, swimsuits, and you'd run through the aisles. Well, I wanted a sweater. Grandma, a sweater. Please, a purple sweater. Can you manage a purple sweater for me? Well, I watched as my grandmother levitated from the ground, did an Esther Williams dive into one of the bins, and miraculously pulled forth the sleeve of a purple sweater. On the other side of the bin, holding the other sleeve, was a woman who I knew instantly when she was not shopping at S. Klein, was driving a Mack truck. My grandmother pulled at one sleeve. The Mack truck lady pulled at the other. My grandmother pulled her sleeve. The Mack truck lady pulled the other. And suddenly, I was reminded of that story from the Bible. You know, the one where King Solomon has to decide the rightful mother of the child? I was reminded of that story and who was the rightful owner of the purple sweater as I watched it unravel in half. Grandma flipped back that purple sleeve, took another Esther Williams dive into the bin, and emerged with two sleeves, a whole purple sweater. And then she warned me, Mamala, close your eyes. Don't look. It's like a horror movie. I covered my eyes the way I did at the horror movies. And then, she was right. The dressing rooms were full, and women were stripping down to their basics, and sometimes trying on the basics. Naked ladies in the aisle of S. Klein. You haven't shopped unless you've shopped like that, and you don't want to ever again in your life. Grandma covered my eyes. We finished our shopping. Her red plastic bag was filled with our bargains, and home we went. Of course, not a seat, and we pole danced all the way back to the Bronx. But best of best was when we walked. We lived on Stratford Avenue. Between Westchester Avenue and Bruckner Boulevard, there is a hill going down, and we would come out of the building, Grandma taking her cart all the way down 3 flights of stairs. It was a metal cart that she pulled behind her. And then we would start walking down the hill. Now, at the base of the hill was a fruit stand. Grandma, I thought we were getting fruit. Oh, Mamala, if we buy the fruit now, it'll be on the bottom of the cart. And by the time we get home, it'll be a fruit salad. And not a fruit salad that anybody will want to eat. So we'll go first. We'll go to the butcher, And then we went to the fish store, and we went to Deitch's appetizing store. Mr. Deitch had pickle barrels that Esther Williams could have dived into. And he would let me reach all the way in and pull out, I guess the brine was sanitary, the biggest dill pickle I could find. He would wrap it in a piece of wax paper. Grandma would buy the lox and the other things from the appetizing store. Mr. Deitch would take out a brown paper bag, and with a pencil, I love telling this story to people of your generation, with a pencil that didn't have an eraser, he would write down the price of every item as he pulled it across the counter. And faster than any child today can do with a calculator, Mr. Deitch would add and total the figures on that brown bag, never making a mistake. I would watch, you could almost hear the adding machine in his head. Then we went to the bakery, and I always got a cookie that had a little dollop of chocolate on the top. Grandma never put chocolate on the top of her cookies. She always put confetti, but I liked the dollop of chocolate, and if I were very nice, the bakery lady would give me a free cookie. And then we got the fruit, and we pulled that cart all the way up the hill. And when we got to the outside stoop, Grandma would stand behind the cart and pull up step by step as I went under the wheels and pushed it up 3 flights of stairs, unless it was very, very heavy, and then we would use the dumbwaiter. I thought that it was a politically incorrect term for people who took your order at the table and weren't very bright. But it seems that a dumbwaiter operates on pulleys and levies, and it's a little thing, and you put the groceries on. I would have to run upstairs, wait by the little door, and then Grandma would be at the bottom pulling and pushing, and up it would come. It was easier to take the cart up 3 flights of stairs, put away the groceries. If the laundry were done, if the house were clean, and if the dinner were made, I would stand in the foyer, watch my grandma with her pinky paint her lips red, and put a clean handkerchief in her pocketbook. We were going to the movies. Back down that street. Then we would go to the left for 4 blocks to the Ward Theater, and on a summer's day, there was a banner that hung outside, and it said, "Cool inside." People had to advertise air conditioning in those days. We would go in, I got 1 nickel, and I could buy whatever I wanted at the candy counter. I always picked one of those caramel lollipops called a Slowpoke. I was learning from Grandma that you could get twice the amount for the money. You see, I would suck it and chew it the first time around, and then pick it out of my teeth and chew it all over again during the second round of the movie. Grandma knew if she got a Slowpoke, she'd be taking her teeth home in that clean handkerchief. She got a sensible Hershey bar. It was always a musical. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire and Juliette Prowse or Leslie Caron, and we would stay through all the credits so that Grandma could learn the melodies to hum the next day while we dusted the house. We would walk out. It was late in the day. She was wearing her clunky old lady shoes, the kind that today are a fashion statement. I was wearing my Buster Brown Oxfords. But when we walked out and I saw the sun, I looked up at Grandma and I said, "Oh, Grandma, Grandma, look. I'm Leslie Caron. I'm Ginger Rogers. Grandma, I'm dancing. Grandma, dance with me. No, Mamala, I can't dance. Oh, Grandma, use your imagination. And then, if the sun were just right, I would look in Grandma's clunky black old lady shoes and my Buster Brown Oxfords would do a slow dissolve to satin ballet slippers. And Grandma and I together, whether we danced or walked, would trip the light fantastic on the sidewalks of New York. As I was telling that story, I was reliving it even more. A month ago, I had a big birthday, whatever that means. And my children, I live in Michigan in the Detroit area. My grown children, my daughter, son, and daughter-in-law live in Chicago, where my kids grew up in Evanston, Illinois, and they've always lived in the Chicago and Evanston area. But they arranged to take me back to New York City for my birthday. They wanted to see, I go there every year, sometimes twice a year for theater, but they wanted to go to the Bronx. They wanted to see where I was born, and they wanted to see where I went back and lived when I was in high school. I'm gonna be telling that story tonight. And so we went back to Stratford Avenue, and I thought, surely that hill was bigger in my memory. It wasn't. It really went down. There's still a fruit stand on the corner. The sad thing is that that whole stoop area has been narrowed and it's gated. It wasn't a great neighborhood when I grew up. It was, a little bit of everything. And the projects were over on Bruckner Boulevard, but it was really a rough and tumble neighborhood now. And in fact, my daughter said, well, I'm gonna go, which window was Grandma's window? And I told her my daughter's named for my grandmother, and I pointed, and my son said, Nick, I don't know that I'd get out of the car if I were you. But she did. Nicole is brave. But anyway, it's still like that. We went back and we went to the train station and all of the things as I remembered it. So that's my story of traveling with Grandma. Well, things changed. And I grew up, we left New York when I was 8. We moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. You'll hear why in this story. My grandmother, by the way, how many of you heard Michael Reno Harrell's story last night about the 3 people who went? Beautiful story, and as he was doing that, I thought, well, for me, my grandmother, my father, and a neighbor I met when I was 13 years old, and who is still in my life, my soul mother, who is still in my life at the age of 91 today. But those are my 3, so here's my dad. My daddy stood in the middle of our living room and, doing his best imitation of an Army sergeant, said, I don't care what the state of Illinois says, 16 years old is just too young for anybody to be driving a car that's not part of an amusement park ride. Well, are you saying that I am a baby? Give me 3 good reasons, came his negotiator's voice. I, who was on my high school debate team, could not think of anything. This should have been a no-brainer. And it was. I had no brain. So I started, everybody else is, I had only to look to know that that was not an argument worth pursuing. So I tried again. Well, if I had the car, I could do some errands and help out around the house. Wasn't getting anywhere. Finally, I did what my daddy taught me to do from the time I was a little girl. Stand up straight and as tall as you can, look the person right in the eye, and make your argument. I have always been a responsible person. What makes you think I will not be a responsible driver? I watched my daddy's curmudgeon crinkles soften. He always appreciated a strong argument. He had been a negotiator for the Lithographers Union. It was a job that had taken us from New York to Tulsa, Oklahoma when I was 8 years old. And he went all around that area that was called the Mountain Region. It went from Missouri to Denver, from Minnesota to Texas. And the way Daddy liked to travel was always by car. He was a tenacious teacher. Now, he had only an 8th grade education, but amassed a library of 10,000 books before he died. He was a voracious reader, and he always was sending me from the road envelopes filled with articles he wanted me to read, cartoons he thought I would appreciate, even as a young child. I think my daddy invented the term distance education. He loved to travel best by car, and he always loved big cars, Buicks and Oldsmobiles. He liked being king of the road, master of his destiny, and he changed those cars as frequently as he could, especially if the ashtrays got full. Well, when he'd come home from his trips, I was always first one at the door to greet him with my usual refrain. "What'd you bring me?" Daddy was neither sentimental nor a shopper. He would always answer, "I brought you me." It took me all the way to growing up to realize it was the best gift I ever had, the gift that still keeps on giving. Well, when summer was out, that meant I would get to go with him on his trips, which really meant when school was out, I was still in school. Daddy used the car as a learning classroom. It was an open air, open window classroom. The first thing he taught me, we didn't have seat belts, and Daddy, whenever he'd have to come to a stop, would automatically put his right hand across me. It's a gesture I still imitate, even in an empty car. And then the first thing he did was to make me the navigator. I had to learn, I was 8 years old, how to read a map. Here was his reasoning. "Honey, you need to learn how to read a map so that you don't have to stop and ask for directions. If you stop and ask for directions, they will know you are not a man. And honey, when you grow up, I'm going to teach you how to drink like a man too. You're going to drink your coffee black, and you're going to drink your alcohol straight. Scotch and soda, scotch and water, or straight scotch on the rocks. None of those pink, whipped up, frappy, frothy, feminine things for you. No, honey, you're gonna drink like a man." I was starting to think that after my older sister and I were born, that actually he had been very disappointed in the fact that I had not shown up to be a boy. My mother claimed that my daddy bought a suit for my bris, which is the ritual circumcision for Jewish boys. Here I am. But what he was really doing, he was a man who was politically correct before there was a term, political correctness. He was rearing my sister and me to be able to take care of ourselves. Now, my daddy taught me how to drive when I was 16 and a half years old, but he taught me how to navigate life when I was 8 next to him. He taught me how to assess another person's personality. He taught me the rules of the road that the state of Illinois would never, ever make me learn. First thing was, honey, see here? See that guy who's just speeding down the road, speeding down the road? When you grow up, I don't want you to be a speed demon. If you're gonna break a law, you make sure it's a law worth breaking, and the speed limit isn't. Oh, honey, you see that guy going right down the middle of a 2-lane highway. He is called a road hog. Now, when you grow up, don't you be a road hog. You stick to your lane. Honey, that guy just cut off a truck driver. Now, listen to me. When truck drivers, cab drivers, and bus drivers, when they're driving, they are working. And you never interfere with someone who's trying to do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. You stay behind them and never cut them off. I was learning all sorts of things driving with my daddy and trying to process and remember them. And sometimes, in addition to navigating, he would actually let me steer the car. Sometimes he had to take his jacket off on a long trip, or he always had this yellow pad all folded up, fitted tightly into his shirt pocket with a pen there, and he'd have to write a couple of notes that he was thinking of. And so he would let me steer the wheel. I'd get all close next to him, and I would steer the wheel. I was Sancho Panza to his Don Quixote, and he was very careful. He'd keep one eye on the road and the other on me. Well, I reminded Daddy of all my driving experience that summer night that I was taking driver's ed, and Daddy had to take me out to the parking lot at Niles West High School in Skokie, where I had to practice making my turns. You see, that morning in summer school, between my junior and senior year, my daddy let me finally take behind the wheel driving. And I was trying to learn. I got in, I'd never been behind the wheel of a car except to steer, and the driving teacher was sitting next to me. We were pulling out of the parking lot, and he said, "Turn right." And I did. He had not said, "Turn right when you get to the road." I turned right into the ditch. The driving teacher had to get the car out of the ditch, and then he told me not to come back until I had mastered making my right and left-hand turns. He didn't care what the state of Illinois said any more than my daddy did. So that night, we were driving around the parking lot at Niles West High School, and I was getting really good. I was in my dad's Olds 88, and I was turning right and turning right and turning right, and then I was turning left and turning left, and then I started accelerating, and his lion's roar came, "Slow down, don't be a speed demon." In literature, we would call that moment foreshadowing. Well, I passed driver's ed that summer. And in the fall of my senior year in high school, when everybody in my class had a driver's license, I asked if I could please go and take the driving test. And Daddy said, "No, there's no reason for you to take a driving test because you're never getting the car and you're never getting behind the wheel of the car." I was the only one in my graduating class at Niles West High School who had not gotten a driver's license. I was beginning to think that when I had my own children, I was going to have to drive them around with a licensed driver still next to me. Finally, in the spring of my senior year, when I was 17 years old, Daddy said, "Okay, you can go and get your license." Now, the most difficult thing is going to be parallel parking. So he taught me how to parallel park between two cars, which is the way parallel parking is meant to be. But that's not how it was at Elston Avenue when I took the driver's test. I did everything I was supposed to do. I went left, I went right, I stopped, I went uphill, and I parked with the brake. I went downhill, and I parked with the brake. And the last thing the driving inspector told me to do was to parallel park. There were not two cars. There were orange flags that were there. And they were much harder to judge the distance. I tried very hard. I was going back, and I was very successful. I just want you to know, I'm a very good parallel parker. Until I looked behind me, and I didn't see that orange flag that was back there on the right-hand side of the car at the curb. And when I got out of the car, it was at half-mast. Daddy was standing next to it. The driving instructor got out. Daddy had one eye on the flag and the other on me. I think the driving instructor took pity because I got my license. Yes! Nah, it didn't matter. Honey, you're not driving that car until I know that you are safe and can take care of yourself. That means you have to change the tire. It was a hot summer day before I went away to college. It was August, long days, very hot. I was out there the better part of the afternoon, learning how to change the tire on a 1962 Olds 88. The tire was bigger than I was. I felt like I was a prisoner on the chain gang. I was doing my best whining imitation of a prisoner on the chain gang. Daddy was doing his best imitation of warden of the chain gang. He had one eye on the tire, the other on me, and as I whined and said, I can't do this, you can and you will. You see, honey, I cannot let you have this car until I know that you can take care of yourself. I changed that tire. I have not changed another tire since. My daddy neglected to tell me about AAA. I went off to the University of Illinois that fall. I was the only one in a class of thousands who still had not driven a car by myself. But 6 weeks into the semester, after midterms, we came home to change our summer clothes and bring back to school our winter ones. My college roommate and I were thrown together, but we had become best friends, still are, and we were missing one another that weekend, so she called me on Friday night, and she said, let's meet at Old Orchard Shopping Center tomorrow. And I said, Robbie, I can't get to Old Orchard Shopping Center. I will never get the car. Can you come pick me up? She says, no, I can't pick you up. I'll take you home. See if your dad will drive you. So I went into the family room. Daddy was sitting and reading the newspaper, and I said, could you take me to Old Orchard tomorrow to meet Robbie? He said, no. Honey, the keys to the car are just on the desk. Just take them. As if he'd been saying that all of my teenage years. And I marveled at how much my father had learned in the 6 weeks that I had been in college. Well, I went to Old Orchard Shopping Center, and I did not have a flat tire. I did have just the teensiest little accident. I was trying to make my way in to see if I had had a parallel park, it would have been fine, but I had to diagonal park into a place that today we would call handicap parking. I had been waiting for that spot. I didn't judge it correctly. I clipped the other car. When I got out, it was perfect. The headlight on my dad's car was cracked. I did the manly thing. I parked, left it, went inside and shopped. And on the way home, I formulated what I am certain to this day was the case that was made for no-fault insurance. And when I walked into the family room, Daddy was sitting in his favorite chair doing his best imitation of Lincoln at the memorial. I stepped up doing my best imitation of Perry Mason in front of the judge. I didn't get through opening arguments. Daddy looked at me and said, "Honey, fault isn't important. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. Just go and get the headlight fixed, pay the bill, and leave the receipt and the keys on the kitchen table." I paid the $11 bill that afternoon and never heard another word about that headlight for the rest of his life. That's next summer. The end of my freshman year in college, Daddy was going back to New York for a conference, and he wanted me to go with him because, of course, he wanted to drive, king of the road, and I was going to now be his assistant driver. Well, at the end of the conference, we realized we both had really bad colds, and he said, "You know what, honey, let's just drive back to Chicago in one trip. We'll alternate. You'll sleep in the back seat, I'll drive, you'll drive." And that was the plan. He got us out of New York City and on to the Jersey Turnpike and then on to the Pennsylvania Turnpike before he turned the car over to me with these words: "Don't speed in Pennsylvania. Whatever you do, don't speed. You speed in Pennsylvania, they're going to lock you up, throw away the key, I'm never going to see you again." I got through all 7 tunnels, turned the car over to Daddy. We alternated in Ohio and Michigan. He was in the back seat, snoring away somewhere about dawn, and we were in Northwest Indiana. I was driving, and I saw a state patrol car come up alongside me, and the officer waved. I waved back. He waved again. I waved back. He waved again, and I realized he wanted me to pull over on the side of the road. I couldn't imagine why. And then I rolled down the window, and I don't know, maybe it was my ponytail and the cute little bow I had in it. I had no makeup on, but he looked at me and he said, "Young lady, do you have a driver's license?" Oh, yes, sir. I was going to tell him the whole story that I just told you about how I got, but I decided that was not the manly thing to do. I took out the driver's license and I gave it to him, and I watched as he read every single thing on it, and I swear I heard him mumble under his breath, "I don't care what the state of Illinois says, 18 years old is too young for somebody to be driving a car. That's not part of an amusement park ride." Just then, I heard my daddy's grizzly bear come to life in the back seat. He rose up. He had one eye on the state trooper, the other on me. It was that look that he gave to road maps that refused to be refolded according to their original creases. The state trooper took pity. He gave me only a warning ticket. To this day, I do not speed in Northwest Indiana. I have been warned. As we pulled away, I waved to the state trooper, and then I looked in the rearview mirror at my daddy and I said, "You told me not to speed in Pennsylvania. You didn't say a word about Indiana." Well, years later, Daddy moved from Illinois to Arkansas, where he retired. And I moved from Illinois to Michigan. But every couple of weeks, I'd still get these envelopes filled with articles. Sylvia Porter telling me how to handle my money. Ann Landers telling me how to handle my children. Mike Royko telling me how to handle my politics. And always, always, a few hints on safe driving. And then, just about 20 years ago, my best teacher went and got sick on me. It was the winter of 1996, and I went out to Rogers, Arkansas. He was at St. Mary's Hospital. It was a brutal winter in Arkansas, and it was icy, and I was driving his big car, his white Lincoln Town car, on those windy, icy, rural roads. I did not dare to tell him that I was taking my one lane right down the center of those 2-lane highway. And when I got to the hospital, he looked up at me and he said, "Honey, listen, you go get my car. You pull it up to the back. I'm gonna sneak past the nurse's station. I'm gonna go down the stairs and we're gonna take off." Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, one last time. All that, he couldn't even walk. I did the manly thing. I stood up as tall as I could. I looked him straight in the eye, and doing my best imitation of Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I said, "I don't care what the state of Arkansas says, women of a certain age should not be driving on icy, windy, rural roads unless they're part of an amusement park ride." He died a few weeks later, and I thought it was appropriate that his last earthly journey was by car from Arkansas to Chicago, where we buried him. And just before we closed his casket, my daughter took a piece of paper and showed it to me. It said, "Welcome home, Papa Marty. Safe journey." And she slipped it in, and he was off. I wish I could tell you what direction he went in. Being neither saint nor sinner, I can't be sure. But being an indigenous Yankee, I sure hope he had the good sense to travel north. And that's where I imagine he is today, on that celestial highway, driving down there, king of the road, master of his destiny. One eye on that highway, and the other, well, that one is still on me. Thank you so much. Thank you for being an audience who appreciates stories and who comes and supports them. Thank you to Helen, our MC, and to Cynthia Bledsoe and the library. This is rare, a storytelling festival to have started up in the last 3 years is a rare treat. Treasure it, enjoy it, but most of all, if any stories that we tell over this weekend remind you of your own and trigger those memories, you tell those stories. They are your legacies of love. Shalom.